performance, so introducing perceptual control theory into the athletic area. So just a little bit of background about myself. I used to play football, American football. I grew up in Germany, so I know football is not not the same, and I know we have international crowd. So yeah, I played American football, and back then I was mostly concerned with my physical development. So it was all about getting stronger, getting faster, getting bigger, so that way I could compete at the highest levels. So this picture is from me when I was with the New York Giants back in the early 2000s. Then about 10 years ago, that's when I was focused more on cognitive development. So that was after my playing career. I was more focused on how can I get athletes to kind of adopt some of the things I wanted them to do on the field or court. And so it's all about cognitive development, looking at motivation, looking at some of these things. So that was mainly interested in the psychological factors, not just the physical aspects of sport, which led me down a path of learning about neuroscience. And that's when I started my PhD 5 years ago, which I received last year. And my focus was on skill development, but looking at it from a neuro perspective. And I was very fortunate to be in a program that was started by Dr. Kelso, who is a dynamic systems theory, one of the early advocates for that. And he developed a lot of theories and practical applications for sports. And so he is a big name in the skill development arena, and that's the PhD program I entered into. So enough about me. So now let's look at a little bit about give you a little bit of background about the evolution of skill development. So in the 70s to 90s, it was mostly about strength and conditioning. That's when the first strength programs started being implemented in athletic in the athletic arena, where Nebraska and teams like that started to implement strength and conditioning, which quickly had them dominate the competition, and then was followed by a lot of other teams who saw that they couldn't compete unless they would have a similar program. Then in the 90s, it was all about speed and agility. So programs started to implement more speed and agility drills, trying to get their players faster, because speed, if you can't catch the person you're trying to control with your strength, then your strength doesn't matter. So speed always beats strength. Then in the 2000s and up till now, the main focus is on analytics and schemes. So if you watch a lot of sports, you hear a lot of teams talking about their analytics, and they basically trying to figure out how they can get teams who are faster and stronger, how they can get them to basically run in the wrong direction. Because the faster you run in the wrong direction, the further you're out of place. So that's why it's out of position. So that's why it's important right now that teams adopt like a analytics and schemes focus. But the future is going to be on vision and processing. So again, evolution is always the new system is trying to beat out the old system, and vision and processing is going to be the next part. So as coaches trying to basically have a lot of misdirection and try to get players to run in the wrong direction, those players have to figure out how to counter that by processing the information they see in much faster. So that's the future, which obviously lends itself to perceptual control theory. That's why I stumbled across that a few years ago when I started my PhD, because I was looking for ways to improve vision and processing, and that's when I first came in contact with perceptual control theory. Which, by the way, my talk is it's not as structured as like I'm not presenting a study or anything. So please feel free, if you have any questions in between, just stop me and ask any questions you feel you want answered. So most of you know the PCT hierarchy. You know the different levels of the hierarchy, which I'm using to try to develop a framework to have players use, or coaches use, to train their players, so that way they can have a little more guidance, because I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but the way they're coaching currently is not in line with what we know about the nervous system development and how the brain learns and how the body learns. So we're trying to incorporate some of these new theories, and perceptual control theory can definitely help with that. All right, all of you know the control system with the comparator, perceptual input, and reference output. And then we have a little game over here. So I don't know if y'all can unmute real quick. So that's basically how I try to relate this when I speak to different people who might not be versed with PCT or dynamic systems and negative feedback control. So I'm always use this example to kind of give them a little illustration. So we have the perceptual input, we have the comparator over here, which is the phrase we're trying to solve, and the reference output. I'm sure everybody or most of you are familiar with this setup. This is Wheel of Fortune. So you basically have to figure out, name letters to fill in these blank spots and to solve the phrase. So you have the perceptual input, which is the letters, the information, and then you have the reference output, which is basically guiding you what the next piece of information might be that you're looking for. All right, so let's play. So since it's PowerPoint, so you cannot just guess, you cannot name the letters you want up there. So I'm gonna just give you some letters and you got to solve the phrase as fast as possible. So anybody, make sure you unmute it, and so that way just shout it out as soon as you know what the phrase is.
Perceptual control theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did I
What'd you say?
Perceptual control theory.
Very good. So see, y'all didn't need much information at all in order to solve that, just by looking at the spaces in between. So the reason I chose that is because it's something that all of you guys are very familiar with, and that's one of the things that's very important in sports. As you know, you're trying to go up higher and higher in levels in order to solve a certain task. So the higher you go up in the levels, the more certain you are that the task will be solved right, because the lower levels, it's more incidental, and then the higher you go, and if you're able to kind of connect all the dots, so to speak, then you know that the solution is probably a little more robust. So your experience in this made you solve the problem much faster. So that's the way I look at it when I look at sports, because let's go back to it. Players might only have this amount of information, and they need to be able to advance to the next level in order to continue to solve the problem. Because in sports, the biggest problem is time. So when we look at therapy, like the method of levels or anything else, you have all the time in the world. You can consciously think about processes, and you can dissect them and really dive deep. In sports, unfortunately, we don't have that much time. It's in milliseconds we're working with. So we have to try to solve problems as fast as possible. So if you can solve a problem with just a little bit of input and know how to advance, so to speak, to the next level, that's basically how you get more skillful in sports. So we have perceptual control theory here. So now let's look at it from a performance model. So like I mentioned, traditional training is not really focused on the processing part of information processing part of athleticism. They just mainly focused on the movement. So they focus on body movements, and it's, like I said, speed, agility, and strength. And it's, again, the same focus that I had when I was playing. That's continuously being the focus of coaches right now. So the PCT performance model that I'm proposing focus more on the visual perceptions, so distances, angles, and gaps, which is really what guides you in athletic performance. And so that's why it's important to basically find information, solve the problem, the word problem or the phrase problem quicker. And then obviously, as you know, the levels get more complex as you go up. So phrases turn into paragraphs, paragraphs turn into pages, pages turn into chapters. So you just keep going up the hierarchy, and it gets more complex. So it's very important to be able to solve the problem as quickly as possible. So traditionally, coaches provide detailed description of the ideal technique. The problem with that is that because we are working under such time constraints, you don't have time to consciously control what you're doing, because it would just take too long for information. Just even to get the visual information to your higher cognitive parts takes about 150 milliseconds. And then for you, like in the traditional model, they thinking that you think about it and you cognize, and then you direct your motor system to execute a certain action. That would take another 250 milliseconds to get your cognitive system to direct your muscle. So that model is misguided, and that's why I'm proposing something new, where we basically letting the player discover control mechanisms by exploring the environment. So it's very important. You cannot tell a player what they need to do or even what they need to see. You can guide them there, but they have to discover those perceptions themselves. And that again falls right in line with method of levels. You're not trying to tell a person how they should how you can fix that problem by doing this, doing X, Y, and Z, but they have to figure out, they have all the solutions in them. It's just a matter of guiding them the right way, so that way they can find those solutions. And so traditional performance models are all about stabilizing the system by repeatedly rehearsing the same movement. So if you ever been with a, I don't know, tennis coach, soccer coach, any sport you play, they usually have you doing the same thing over and over and over again in the same manner, standing the same way, and just, let's say in tennis, just feeding you the ball and just have you do repeated movements, thinking that you're going to learn the skill that way. But that's not really how skill learning happens in the nervous system. What I'm focused on with this approach is to disturb the system by varying perception or reference signals. So those are the only ways you can get the system to reorganize. So that those are the things that I'm disturbing in order for players to kind of find the solution to their athletic problem they have. All right, so now let's look at like how the nervous system solves some of these main problems in sports, which the two main problems in sports is usually interception. It's either intercepting an object by catching it, kicking it, running towards it, tackling it, whatever it might be. That's a big part, and evasion is the other part, like getting away from people and evading somebody. So there are certain control mechanisms, and so the constant optical position is one way of solving the problem for the brain as far as distances are concerned, like being able to intercept something. So you want to make sure. Oh, did I hear somebody say something? Oh, no, never mind. So you want to make sure that, for example, the ball stays within this little circle. So the circle kind of represents like an area in your retina. Obviously, it wouldn't be that big, but it's an area in your retina. If you maintain the ball position in that area, the ball will arrive you will arrive at the ball. So if the ball, let's say, sails over, then you know if it's over the mark, then you will not catch the ball. Or if the ball goes under, then again, you will miss the ball. So what you need to do is maintain that ball in the circle or in the position on the retina by moving your sensors. So like a regular PCT type of way of thinking of it. So you moving your sensors in order to maintain the ball in there. So if it starts sliding below, then you have to move forward in order to catch the ball. And so another part of interception is tackling people. So again, my sport's football. So a very important part is making sure that you have a constant bearing angle. So maintaining the angle towards the person, and the way you usually focus on that is, by the way, can you see my arrow or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see how that goal post right here, the player is aligned with that goal post. So one technique for the brain in order to figure out how to arrive at the person is to maintain that same angle. So the person should be in the same angle towards that goal post. And if they are, no matter what direction they run in, you will arrive at the person. So as long as you stay, that goalpost maintains the same angle, you arrive at the person. If the goalpost shifts in the same direction as the person running, then you're going to be too far ahead of them. And if the goalpost shifts the opposite direction of where they're running, then you're going to be too far behind them. So that's basically how your brain figures out how to how to arrive at an interception point. So so we talked about distances, now we talk about angles, and the last part is gaps. So we have optic flow, the way your brain figures out if it can shoot through a gap is basically by looking at the direction of running and everything else around you. So these arrows represent how you move, how fast the objects that are in that area are moving. So the bigger arrows, those objects move faster. So that's kind of how you figure out the distance. And where you're running to over here, they're going to be really small arrows, and the direction you're running is going to be constant because it does not change the size. The objects are not passing by you. So that's how you can figure out your gaps that you're running through. So these are some of the elements of that you're using in sports in order to figure out your distances, angles, and gaps. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the different levels and how we can train this. All right, so this is the quarterback drill. So for most of you might not be that familiar with American football, so just let me explain it real quick. So we have a quarterback who usually throws the ball, and over here we have a receiver who catches the ball. So I'm going to introduce like a simple drill, which is designed to disturb the sensations level. So you're trying to have a loss of common experience of sensations. And the goal is to identify the most relevant perceptual information. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have the quarterback wear stroboscopic glasses, which are basically glasses that kind of blind you for split seconds and then they go on and off. And it's basically like you blinking, like a really extended blink. And during the passing drill, we're trying to disturb the visual sensations through those that partial occlusion. So we're forcing them to make quick identification of the most relevant visual configurations. So that's disturbing at the sensations level. So that's why my approach, I'm trying to basically guide coaches on how to implement some of these strategies, because there's a lot of strategies out there based on it's called ecological dynamics. It's basically a framework that focuses on how players really develop skill, and it's basically saying that variability is very important. So it's departing from the traditional model of repetitive of repeatedly doing the same movements. Instead, they're focusing on variability and making sure that you do various different things. So there are different strategies that you can implement. The problem with this approach is that it's very specific to the person and to the context. So it's very difficult for coaches to implement that. So that's why I'm trying to create a framework to make it a little bit easier for coaches to implement this process. So back to our little football drill over here. Again, this is the quarterback, this is the receiver. And so the receiver runs a route and then the quarterback got to throw it. So the dotted line represents the quarterback throwing the ball to the receiver. So this is a really simple drill that football players do all day. They basically have quarterbacks repeatedly throw this route and hope that the quarterback learns some type of motor program, which again is an illusion, but learns the motor program in order to execute this throw perfectly in the right spot. So that would be the traditional way of doing it, just repeatedly repeating this movement. I'm suggesting that we are disturbing it at different levels. So at the sensations level, like I said, we're going to have the stroboscopic glasses. So as we go up the hierarchy, the drills become a little more complex. As they get more complex, basically we're figuring out the skill level of the player, because the higher the level of the problem they can solve, the more skilled the player is. So it's also an evaluation tool in order to see where players are. So at the configurations level, it's basically a loss of order and consistency. So the goal is to identify specifying movement information. So as the receiver runs the route, makes the inside cut, we're trying to disturb the usual position or configuration and forcing the quarterback to identify the wide receiver movement. So the transition of how the receiver runs the route, because every receiver has a different way of cutting in. So as the receiver runs the route, the quarterback throws the ball. But what we gonna do is we run it at different depths. So by running at different depth, the quarterback basically, and not telling the quarterback at what depth they're running, the quarterback cannot use the position anymore in order to figure out, okay, after 15 yards, that's when I throw. But the quarterback has to basically identify what the receiver's unique movement is when he cuts or when she cuts. It's basically figuring that out. So it's specifying the information that will work in more instances. Like I said, the higher you go up the hierarchy, the more consistent you are in solving the problem. Because if you just look at position and the receiver for any reason runs a little bit deeper than they're supposed to go, then you would miss the receiver because they're not in the right position anymore. So we want to make sure that we're disturbing this part in the configurations level by having the receiver run different depth of the route, which in football terms would be it's almost like like you cursing out the coach if you're telling them like you run the receivers running at different routes, because currently coaches tell them to run exactly at 12 yards or exactly at 15 yards and do not stray from that. So it's departing from the traditional way of coaching, especially in football. So then we go into the next level, transitions level. So we're disturbing the transitions level by not knowing how to guide spatial vision during movement. So the goal is to develop visual adaptability. So the quarterback must move in random patterns by like spinning around in a circle or running around or hopping. So just different movements before throwing the ball to a receiver to quickly adapt their gaze patterns to the disturbance from their own body movements. So you're going to have the quarterback move around a little bit and then throw. So again, that is usually not how they do it in real football, because the quarterback usually stands in the same spot and throws it. So we're trying to create a disturbance in the transitions level by moving the quarterback around. And then again, variability is very important. So we don't want to always do the same movements. We don't want to just always go from left to right or right to left or always spin, but we want to vary the movement. So that way the person has to find the connection between the what works and all the ancillary things that change. So we're trying to find the perceptual invariance, something that does not change, like the earlier things I showed you with the position doesn't change, or the background doesn't change, or the gap, the movement of objects that doesn't change. So those are some of the perceptual invariants we're trying to figure out. Again, the problem is you cannot tell somebody what that is, because number one, it's a subjective part, and number two, even if you could tell them, like the player is not consciously aware of them doing it. So that's why variability is very important. So at the next level, at the events level, it's not knowing where to move and look. So the goal is to develop spatial and temporal control. And so the quarterback must, for example, shift their gaze strategies to accommodate the different routes the receiver is running in a variable practice schedule. So variable practice means the receiver is running different routes right after each other. Usually in football, they have a quarterback and the receivers, there might be 10 receivers on the side, and every one of those 10 receivers is going to run the same route at the same distance. And so the quarterback cannot figure out what the different event might be. So it's always the same event. So we're trying to disturb the event that the quarterback has to adjust their gaze strategy in order to solve the problem. And we have the relationships level. So we're trying to basically disturb the relationship between defenders and the target, and the goal is to develop a relational control. So have defensive players drop in coverage, so they're trying to defend the pass. So we have the two defensive players right here, and they must identify the quarterback must identify the relationship between them and the wide receiver over here in order to accurately throw the ball between them. So as the defenders go back, the quarterback got to find the gap in between them and got to look at where the defenders are in relation to receivers. So you throw in at different angles in order to figure out, in order to avoid the defenders. So that's the relationship level. Categories level. So not knowing how to differentiate between different throws. So the goal is to develop situational awareness. So the quarterback must adjust the type of throw to release the ball before the defender arrives while hitting the right receiver in the designated target area right here. So the defender is going to run at the quarterback, and the quarterback got to release the ball right before the defender gets there. So they have to throw it in different angles. So they might have to throw it a little bit earlier because the second person arrived much sooner. So they have to throw it earlier. And so this arc is basically representing like a higher release angle. So that way they have to throw it earlier and still hit the same spot. So it's basically trying to figure out what type of throw they have to perform in order to hit the target. So it's varying the type of throw.
5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Almost there. And then disturbing sequences. So it's not knowing how to organize the rhythm of the throw. So we're trying to develop self-organizing skills. So the quarterback must adjust the arm angle to avoid the ball being blocked by the rushing defender. So this time the defender is trying to stay in front of him and it's trying to basically keep the quarterback from throwing the ball by blocking it. So the quarterback has to throw at different arm angles in order to adjust for that. So it has to change the sequence of their throw. Oh, this is, oh, I guess I forgot this other. So yeah, this is actually the real slides. So you see the defenders like right in front trying to block the slide. Then we have programs level. So it's disturbing the programs level is not knowing what choice to make. So we're trying to develop decision-making abilities. So we have the defender dropping coverage. So the quarterback must focus on the different information sources to evade the rush. So one person is rushing, another person is dropping. So the quarterback has to adopt the gaze strategy to figure out where to look. So what program to use. Do I look at the defender rushing me? Do I look at the receiver? Do I look at the defender? So it's trying to figure out what is the best program in that split second. And then finally, for the principles level, is disturbing principle is not knowing what is the best option. So we basically present the quarterback with different scenarios by saying, for example, you don't have to, I mean, you would have to know football a little bit by the importance of getting the first down and on fourth down. So you got to make sure that you get the ball to a certain spot or throwing the ball out of bounds to preserve time. So because you might not have enough seconds left, so you cannot make an accurate pass in the middle of the field because then time would expire because the clock doesn't stop. Or not getting sacked when in the field goal range so that we don't get pushed further back so that way you can still make a field goal. So it's basically giving the quarterback some principles to follow and then they have to decide within that drill what principles they follow. So it's like a similar drill over here. So those are my conclusions. So the key points for skill development is you want to highlight perceptions instead of movements. You want to emphasize exploration instead of instructions because only the player can identify how to control their perceptions. And then you want to disturb those perceptions instead of guiding actions. So those are the key points in the approach that I'm trying to develop. That is it. Any questions?
There's one question from the room from Kent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is very exciting. I think this is an interesting and applicable use of this. I've heard it, great players described as those who can just look at the whole picture and see the whole field, like a great basketball player can see all the different movements and send that ball to where the player is going to be, or the great football or soccer player sees all the things developing. And
Yeah, so
what you're trying to do is get people to have those same great perceptions of everything going on, seeing it at a high level.
yeah, so going back to the Wheel of Fortune game, because perception in it's not I don't know how much you know about visual perception, but you like saccades, like so your eye basically moves 5 to 10 times per second and it's trying to find information. It's like you kind of looking through, because if you like were to stretch out your arm and then just close one eye and look at your thumbnail, that's about all the information that you can see clearly. Everything else, I know the visual world seems clear in front of you, but that's just an illusion because your eye really moves really fast in order to capture that information. So it's basically what I'm talking about with the Wheel of Fortune is you trying to find the letters that go in. So in Wheel of Fortune, you have the letters obviously in your head so you know them, but just now imagine you have to go and look for those letters before you put them up there. So that's basically what I'm trying to train people to do, is to find the information they're looking for as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, they obviously have to know what the information is, where they can can find that information, when they have to act on that information in order to basically align their perceptions to basically find that perceptual signal that they're seeking.
There's one online first, and then, yeah, by Farrell.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Phil, Dr. Phil, here in Canada, and I work for the Department of National Defense. And there's a comment in the chat that you might be interested in reading. But my question is, first of all, great presentation.
Thank you.
My question is this reorganization or is this tuning of gains around the perceptual control theory loop?
Say that again. I couldn't hear the last.
He's asking, is it reorganization or is it tuning of gain within the hierarchy?
Yeah, so it's both. So the tuning happens in the game. So as you go, obviously reorganization takes a little bit longer in order for your system to calibrate and be able to do that. So that's why repetition is important, but you don't repeat the same thing over and over. That's why variability is so important. It's just kind of, you have like, let's say, a blank canvas and you're trying to basically fill in all the different spots because, again, you don't know what the subjective perception of that person is. What is the perceptual invariant they're trying to control? So you basically got to expose them to as many of those perceptual experiences as possible, so that way they can find which one works for them, because it's different from person to person based on their abilities, based on their nervous system, and based on the situation they're in, because every situation they're in is different. Even if you're trying to do the same thing over and over again, your body moves different. So if any or one of you have like paper and pencil or pen in front of you, if you try to do your signature, which you have probably done thousands of times in your life, like traditional way would tell you like you should be able to do it the exact same way. But I can guarantee you, no matter how many times you try, none of those signatures will ever look the same. So, and that's just a really small degree of freedom with just your wrist or your elbow. So, and sports movements, obviously you got your whole body that you got to move. So that's way too many degrees of freedom in order to control movement based on repeating it over and over again. So that's not how your nervous system will learn the movement. So it's important to vary the movement.
France,
Is there any experience with this kind of coaching in golf?
In golf, yeah. I mean, it's in all sports. So, and that's the problem, because there's so much literature out there showing that I mean, my approach, I'm trying to create a framework. So the levels, you won't really find that anywhere. But it's a similar approach to the ecological dynamics I mentioned, which is focused on the variability. So you might tell a golf player to, when they always, like, let's say they, I don't know what the term is, but they shoot to the side and instead of straight. So you might actually tell them, yes, I want you to do a swing where you aim and for the side that you're always shooting. So basically varying their perceptions and showing them like what works, what doesn't work, and it's basically trying to lean into the problem, or doing different crazy things before you shoot the golf, which is called differential learning. You might, like I said, spin in a circle and hit the golf ball, or hop to the thing and then hit the golf ball. It's basically trying to figure out what works for your system, and it has to experience as many different ways of doing that as possible in order to figure out what is the control mechanism that aligns with what they're capable of and with what their perceptions they are trying to control. And by varying their performance, you can identify that quicker than if you're trying to do the same thing over and over again.
Thank you.
okay, I have a comment myself. The reference value is evoked from memory. And so a lot of what you're doing is establishing familiarity with different possibilities, which means very clear in memory, so that it's accessible more immediately rather than having to be created at a higher level, looking for reference values.
Yeah, so in sports, the higher levels, it's you cannot get to the conscious level. So that's why if you ever heard about choking, or in sports, when people focus consciously on their performance, that is usually a negative in sports, and they usually mess up because, as you know, if you're trying to access a level, you're trying to kind of reorganize it, and you're trying to find different ways. So from a nervous system perspective, you're going to have different impulses trying to find a way to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. So if you ever seen Shaquille O'Neal and focus on his free throws, back in the days, like he was so robotic because he consciously trying to focus on, I got to move my arm this way, and you cannot do that in sports. So that's very important that everything that you're doing is guided subconsciously. That's why you cannot tell players how to perform, because you don't have access to their subconscious and they don't have access to it. So telling them what to do is not really working. So you have to guide them in different ways, and they have to figure it out. And by providing that variability, hopefully they find the solution that they're looking for.
But you tell them what perception to control.
Not even telling them, because if I tell somebody, okay, I want you to keep the ball in this certain spot in your retina, which I don't know what part of that retina would be, and like it wouldn't make sense, it wouldn't help them at all. So I can explain it to somebody who wants to know the process of how it works, but in the moment, like it would not help them. All I can do, for example, in the process of catching a ball, instead of keeping the ball the same size, which they might use an approach of trying to figure out the exact position. So somebody might be able to control their perceptions by saying, okay, when the ball's in this position, that's when it's close and I'm going to catch it. The problem with that approach is, what if the ball, like especially in football, when you see the ball not being in a tight spiral, but like fluttering a little bit, the size is different, so that in your retina it seems like the object is closer or further away, so you cannot use that approach anymore. So a solution to that is, okay, varying the size of the ball that you've thrown at the person, because then they can't use the position control mechanism anymore. They got to use a transition, so it's a higher level. So that's basically how to adjust the drill in order for them to get to a higher level without even telling them. So I just switch up the size of the balls, keep throwing the balls, and they just catch them. They don't even realize what they're doing, but they're going to be able at a higher skill level because of that change from position to transition.
Tom Schulte, you had a question online?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is fantastic. Worth getting up at 6:30 in the morning to talk about PCT and football. I'm so excited by this. Is there? I'm curious about the link potentially between some approaches in sports psychology in terms of performance psychology. I use PCT in the training of actors, and the idea of what is the appropriate level to maintain conscious focus. Because I imagine, you go up to the highest identity level and it's, well, I want to be the best quarterback in the world. And my program becomes, I want to win the Super Bowl. So, and those are not necessarily helpful, right? Do you know what I mean? So that you stay task oriented as opposed to the really abstract levels of your
so
identity.
those are always in the background.
Yeah.
As you know, so all these levels operate simultaneously, so that's always in the background. So it depends on what exactly is it. Is it a performance you're trying to have them improve, or is it the way they're thinking about their performance? So that would depend on how you might be able to guide them in that sense. But yeah, so for me, I'm focusing on the performance aspect of physically moving in the competition, where it's milliseconds. But I'm aware of different psychological techniques, because that's my psychology is kind of my background. That's what I teach right now at Florida Atlantic University. So there's different ways to get your psychology to line more closely with what you're perceiving and what you're.
But it sounds like during gameplay, you want them on these levels that are about target.
Yeah, they got to be at the lowest levels, but the higher levels have to guide them in order to kind of correct it, because again, the higher level you can get up to, the more robust the solution is. So that's why it depends on the timing. So like, I wish I could know like at what level certain people are, because I would be a millionaire if I could tell people. But that's kind of the goal with this, is trying to figure out where people are, what level of skill they are at, and then finding ways to adjust the drills that they're doing in practice in order to get them to the next level, and knowing like what are they trying to control and what are they having trouble trying to control. And one way to check that is to look at how often are they successful. So the golden rule is about 70 to 80% of the time you want to be successful in your task. So whatever it is, if you're playing pickleball or you're trying to learn pickleball or trying to do anything, you should not be successful like 90 or 100% of the time, because then you're not learning anything. And if you're only at 50 or 40%, then you're just going to get frustrated because it's just too complex for you, and you have to go down a level in order to kind of figure out where the system is malfunctioning, so to speak. So that's what I'm also trying to figure out, how to assess players and trying to use these levels in order to clearly show people, yeah, this player's at this level, they're struggling with this, so we can do X, Y, Z in order to get them to the next level, so that way their solution is more robust on the field.
Thank you so